Have you ever noticed that the more you try to open up and connect with your family, the more complicated things can get? Maybe you've had moments where you just wanted to be honest, maybe to share a concern, a memory, or even just a feeling. But somehow, it left you feeling more drained than understood. If that sounds familiar, you're not alone. A lot of us discover this quiet truth as we move through our later years. Being open is a beautiful thing, but being wise about what we share is even more powerful. You see, after 60, there's a shift. Life gets quieter in some ways, but deeper in others. The things that used to feel urgent, proving ourselves, explaining everything, trying to be understood, start to fade. And what we crave instead is peace. Not isolation, not secrecy, just peace. A calm kind of confidence. The kind that lets you walk through each day without the weight of everyone else's reactions sitting on your shoulders. That's what we're going to talk about today. Not how to shut people out, but how to hold certain things a little closer to your heart. Not because they're shameful, but because they're sacred. Because sometimes, the most dignified choice we can make is to keep a few truths quietly to ourselves. Let's start with something that feels practical, even responsible. Talking about your finances. Now, if you're anything like I was, you might believe that sharing your financial picture with your family is the smart thing to do. Maybe you've saved up over the years, planned carefully, and you want your kids to be prepared. You figure it'll make things easier someday. Fewer surprises, right? That's exactly what George thought. George is 82 now. He worked as an engineer, lived modestly, invested wisely, and took pride in being prepared. One afternoon, he invited his 2 sons over for coffee. He laid everything out: bank accounts, retirement funds, the house deed, even a spreadsheet that showed how he planned to distribute things one day. He expected his sons to be relieved, maybe even thankful. And at first, they were. But within a week, the question started. "Dad, do you really need such a big place now? Have you looked into assisted living just in case?" One even offered to help manage the finances, just to be safe. It was all said with love. But over time, George started to feel like every decision came with an invisible panel of judges. A new recliner? Was that really necessary? A short trip to visit an old friend? Are you sure flying is still a good idea? He told me the hardest part wasn't that his sons didn't care, it was that they cared too much, too loudly. He felt boxed in, like he had to justify everything, like he had become someone whose choices needed to be approved. And once that door was open, he couldn't close it again. Even the kindest family members can start to overstep without realizing it. It's not just about overstepping. Sometimes the attention shifts entirely. That cousin who never calls suddenly wants to visit. That grandchild who forgot your last birthday starts asking about the will. And you begin to wonder, are they here for me or for what I might leave behind? Now don't get me wrong. You absolutely should have a plan. A will, a power of attorney, someone you trust to handle things when the time comes. That's not just smart, it's necessary. But sharing the full picture too soon can invite pressure you didn't ask for. And worse, it can chip away at something incredibly important: your freedom. You don't need to explain every purchase. You don't need to run your bank statements by anyone. Your money is the result of decades of hard work, of choices made, of sacrifices no one else may even know about. You are the best person to decide how it should be used. And you have every right to protect that power, not from your family, but for yourself. It's not about secrecy. It's about peace. And that leads us to something else we often feel the urge to share: our health. Now I know how tempting it is. You mention to your daughter that your back's been acting up again, or you tell your grandson about a dizzy spell you had last week. It feels like small talk to you, just a casual comment. But here's what we often don't consider. Those little updates land very differently on the other side. To your family, those words carry weight. A sore shoulder might be a passing ache to you, but to them, it's a red flag. And suddenly, you're getting daily check-ins, offers to help, or even suggestions that you stop doing things you love. It can happen fast. Just ask Susan. Susan is 77, a widow, and one of the most independent people I know. She walks her dog every morning, volunteers twice a week, and still tends her own garden. One afternoon, over coffee, she mentioned to her daughter that her shoulders were sore after a weekend of yard work. That's it. No complaints, just a passing comment. By that evening, her daughter had scheduled a physical therapy appointment, insisted on hiring someone to help around the house, and started calling morning and night. What Susan felt was concern. What her daughter heard was fragility. And it didn't stop there. Suddenly, every choice was questioned. Are you sure you should be lifting that? Maybe you shouldn't drive at night anymore. Susan started feeling like a guest in her own life, like she had gone from mother to managed. And it all started with one innocent sentence. You see, when we talk too much about every ache, every discomfort, we risk unintentionally changing how our family sees us. Not as the strong, capable person we still are, but as someone to protect, to handle. And once that image settles in, it's hard to shake. They start hovering, making decisions for you. And even though it comes from love, it wears you down. This doesn't mean you have to suffer in silence. If something's serious, of course, speak up. You deserve support when it truly matters. But you've lived in your body long enough to know what's urgent and what's just part of aging. You don't need to validate every cramp or cough with someone else's reaction. And here's the deeper part. When we talk too often about what's wrong with our bodies, we start to believe that's the whole story. That the most important thing about our day is what hurt. But that's not who you are. You're not just your aches and pains. You are your stories, your hobbies, your laughter, your quiet victories. Don't let discomfort define you. Being thoughtful about what you share doesn't make you cold or closed off. It makes you centered. It lets you own your experience without handing it over for someone else to manage. Because peace isn't just about avoiding conflict. It's about choosing what truly deserves space in your conversations and what doesn't. And that brings us to something that may be even harder to resist: getting involved when family conflict shows up at your door. It usually starts with good intentions. You hear two of your children arguing over something small, a holiday plan, money, how to raise the grandkids, and you feel that tug in your chest. You've lived long enough to know where these disagreements can lead, and all you want is to keep the peace. So, you offer a suggestion, a gentle nudge, maybe just a comment in passing. But somehow, what you meant as support ends up being seen as criticism. That's exactly what happened to Dorothy. She's 80 now, still full of life and sharper than most people half her age. She's one of those women whose opinion people naturally respect. One afternoon during a visit with her daughter, she gently suggested that maybe her 5-year-old grandson could help clean up his toys. No lecture, no judgment, just a soft passing thought. Her daughter smiled politely, but something shifted. The calls came less often. Invitations started to dry up. And before long, Dorothy was left wondering how one simple sentence had created such a deep silence between them. The truth is, in families, even the softest words can echo like thunder when emotions are involved. When people are feeling sensitive, when they're parenting, struggling, disagreeing, your suggestion might feel to them like a spotlight, like they're being judged, not helped. And no matter how carefully you choose your words, they'll hear them through the filter of their own feelings. You might be trying to keep the peace, but suddenly you become the one they think is stirring the pot. You say maybe your brother didn't mean it that way, and both of your kids think you're taking sides. You mention how one family member always borrows money and doesn't pay it back, and now they say you made things awkward. Even when your heart is in the right place, even when you say it with love, what people remember is that you said anything at all. And here's the part no one tells you. Once you become part of the conflict, you become tied to it. They don't just remember the argument. They remember what you said. And that can leave you stuck in the middle, or worse, left out altogether. But there's another way. You don't have to insert yourself into every disagreement, no matter how tempting it is to fix things. You don't have to be the referee. Sometimes the most loving thing you can say is, "I trust you to work it out." Or, "I'm here if you need me." And then let go. Let them figure it out. Let them stumble. Let them grow through it the same way you did, by navigating life's bumps and bruises. That's not abandoning them. That's honoring their ability to become stronger without your constant input. It might feel strange at first, especially if you've always been the one holding the family together. But your role has changed. You've earned the right to protect your peace. You are not the fire department rushing into every blaze. You are the calm eye of the storm. The quiet presence that gives people room to think, not someone whose opinion hovers over every conversation. And choosing to stay out of it doesn't make you weak. It makes you wise. You've lived through enough holidays, arguments, and reconciliations to know that most family tensions pass. They settle. People come around. But the one thing they don't forget is how you made them feel during the storm. And if you can be that steady, warm, open-hearted presence, they'll feel safe coming back to you, not judged, not pushed, just loved. Sometimes the kindest thing you can offer is silence. Not the cold kind, not the angry kind, but the generous kind. The kind that says, "I believe in you. I know you'll find your way." That kind of silence is a gift. And it protects something that's hard to rebuild once it's broken, your connection. And speaking of what's hard to rebuild, that brings us to another area where sharing too much can quietly shift a relationship. I'm talking about our regrets. It's natural, really. At this stage of life, we all carry a few what-ifs and I should haves. Maybe you think about a job you didn't take, a place you never traveled to, a dream you let slip away because life pulled you in a different direction. These thoughts come up not because we're ungrateful, but because we're human. And sometimes they surface in casual conversation. You're out for a walk with your daughter, and you say, "You know, sometimes I wish I'd traveled more when I was younger." It feels like a simple reflection to you, a passing thought. But to your daughter, those words might sting. That's what happened to Evelyn. She raised 4 children, supported her husband through years of illness, and gave up a lot to hold the family together. One day, while walking with her youngest daughter, she softly said, "Sometimes I wish I hadn't let go of my dream to travel." Her daughter smiled, but later admitted that it hurt. She started wondering, had her mom regretted having them? Had they kept her from the life she wanted? And here's the tricky thing. What feels like a harmless reflection to us can land as rejection for someone else. We say, "I wish I'd worked longer." And they hear, "You weren't enough." We say, "Maybe I should have moved to a different town." And they feel like they were never home. It's not what we mean, but it's how it can sound. And once that seed is planted, it's hard to unplant it. Your loved ones might start to feel like your life wasn't fulfilling, like they weren't part of your joy. Even worse, they may start to treat you more delicately, as though you're stuck in the past instead of still fully living in the present. But you're not stuck. You're reflective. And that's different. You've earned the right to look back, but not everything has to be said aloud. Some thoughts, some memories, some sorrows, they're not secrets. They're sacred. They belong to you. And not because you should hide them, but because they deserve quiet space to live in your heart without being misunderstood. If you want to share your growth, your learning, your wisdom, do it in a way that uplifts. Instead of saying, "I wish I had done things differently," try, "I've learned a lot from the life I've lived." That one shift in words changes everything. It moves the focus from what you lost to what you've gained. It honors your experience without placing guilt on someone else's shoulders. You don't have to pretend everything was perfect. You don't have to put on a smile when your heart is heavy. But you do have the right to protect your emotional space. You've carried enough. You don't need to carry everyone else's feelings on top of your own reflections. Sometimes peace isn't about forgetting. It's about remembering gently, quietly, with grace. And that grace, it brings us to the last thing, one that many of us have been told we should share, for the sake of clarity, fairness, and good planning. Our plans for our assets. It sounds so practical, doesn't it? Don't leave your family guessing. Let everyone know what to expect. And there is truth in that. Having a will, a power of attorney, and someone you trust to carry out your wishes is not just smart, it's essential. But here's the part nobody really talks about. When you share every detail about what you plan to leave behind, who gets what, how it'll be divided, what the plan is for your house, your savings, your belongings, you may not be bringing peace at all. You may be inviting something much harder to undo: quiet resentment, silent competition, or even emotional distance. That's what happened with Margaret. She's 81 now, a retired nurse, practical to the core and endlessly generous. She raised 3 kids, and she wanted to do the right thing. So she decided to sit each of them down and explain exactly how her estate would be handled. The house would be sold. The accounts divided. Even family heirlooms were spoken for. At first, it felt responsible. But then things shifted. Her middle son, always relaxed, started calling more often, offering suggestions about selling the house early, while the market's still good. Her daughter, who had moved away years ago to care for her own family, quietly questioned the fairness of the split. "Didn't I sacrifice more?" she asked one day. And the youngest, who'd always been a bit more private, grew even more distant. No arguments. Just coolness, hesitation, like something had changed. And Margaret said something I'll never forget. She said, "I felt like they stopped seeing me. They started seeing the inheritance. That's the risk. Not with everyone, of course, and not always in obvious ways. But even when love is strong, even when intentions are good, knowing too much, too early, can shift the dynamic. Suddenly, your life choices are being viewed through a different lens. Should you really spend on that vacation? Why are you still living in that house if it's going to be sold? Wouldn't it be better to save a little more for the grandkids?" You feel it in the tone, in the glances, in the moments when what used to be your business now feels like family business. And that pressure, whether spoken or silent, slowly chips away at something precious: your freedom. Now, none of this means you shouldn't have a plan. Please, have your documents in place. Name someone you trust. Protect your wishes legally. That's a gift to your family. But you don't owe anyone a preview of the ending. This isn't a book they get to read in advance. It's your life, your story, and your legacy. And your legacy is so much more than what's in a bank account. It's in the values you've passed down, the way you showed up, the way you loved, guided, forgave, endured. Those are the things your family will remember if you let them. But if the focus becomes all about the material, what goes where, who gets what, they may forget the deeper parts. Not because they're ungrateful, but because it's easy to get distracted when money enters the picture. And here's the other truth. If someone only seems interested in your life when the topic of inheritance comes up, that's something to notice. Not to judge, not to hold bitterness, but to recognize. Because your love, your time, your presence should never feel like a transaction. Protecting your plans isn't selfish. It's smart. It's respectful. And it helps ensure that the years ahead, your golden years, can be lived fully, without the shadow of expectation or judgment. So, where does all of this leave us? We've talked about what not to share too freely: your finances, your health details, your involvement in family conflicts, your regrets, your asset plans. And none of it means you need to become closed off or distant. It doesn't mean building walls or pretending everything is fine when it's not. It means something much gentler, much wiser. It means choosing your peace. You've spent your entire life giving time, giving love, giving advice. You've been the helper, the fixer, the comforter. But this chapter, this season of life, is different. It's not about how much more you can give away. It's about how much you're allowed to keep. You are allowed to keep your quiet, your clarity, your boundaries, your freedom to go for a walk without explaining where you're going, to buy something you like without running it past anyone, to say, "I'm okay," and actually mean it, without feeling like you owe someone more of your story than you're ready to tell. Peace isn't just the absence of noise. It's the presence of clarity, of dignity, of choosing not to carry everyone else's reactions on your shoulders. And that's a kind of strength that gets brighter with age. So if you're watching this and nodding along, if any part of this message has echoed something inside you, maybe today is a good day to ask yourself, what am I holding on to that protects my peace? And what have I been giving away too freely? It's never too late to shift, to say less with more meaning, to speak with intention or not at all. Not because you're hiding, but because you know that silence at the right moment is a form of wisdom. You've earned that. Every wrinkle, every scar, every story in your bones says so. And if this message spoke to you, truly spoke to you, I invite you to share one thing in the comments below. Something you're choosing to keep for yourself from now on. It might help someone else out there feel a little less alone, a little more understood. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. Join this growing space we're building together, a kind, thoughtful community of people who know that peace doesn't come by accident. It's something you protect, one choice at a time. Thank you for spending this time with me. Until next time, take care of your heart, take care of your peace, and never forget, you've earned it.